Hey, everybody. Welcome to Monsters Lounge. I'm Jenny.
And I'm Tressa. Oh, hello.
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. Already we're talking over each other. Tressa, I am so excited. So not only was our inaugural show a little bit Bigfoot, but also our second show is extraordinarily Bigfoot.
It's like this show is made for you.
It is. It's like I had a podcast and I talked about stuff that I wanted to talk about.
Wow.
It's crazy. I know. We have a very special guest tonight. Not that all of our guests aren't special. They're all special, but this one is extra special. He is the curator of the North American Bigfoot Center. He is the evidence analyzer for finding Bigfoot. And he's also a host of his own podcast, which is Bigfoot and Beyond with Cliff and Bobo. And you guys are going to need to buckle up because this one's a really good one.
I can't wait.
I know. Do you want to know who our guest is?
I do. Yes, I think everyone does.
Yeah, Cliff Barackman.
Oh, hello, Cliff.
Hello. I was hoping to be Bobo, but, I'll settle for me.
Absolutely thrilled to have you on the show. Bigfoot is very near and dear to my heart. I am not nearly the accomplished researcher that you are, but always a big.
We're all learners.
fan.
At the end of the day, we're all learners. I don't accept that there's any experts in Bigfoot. There are some experts in the subject of Sasquatch, but not the animals themselves. We're all just kind of learning the best we can as we go.
I say that and then realize that you can't really be an expert in something that you haven't actually been able to physically study.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're right.
But yeah, I view myself as someone who just likes to learn about the subject and the animals in particular. And I'm just doing the best job I can. I may have a little bit more experience than some other people because I've been doing it. I realized just recently that 2024 is my 30th year of doing this.
Wow.
So, I mean, but it's just a longevity game, I guess, so I'm a lifer. So
that is amazing. So Tressa and I are going to be going to Portland this summer for a Bigfoot Fest. And so we are going to be stopping by the museum.
Oh, you should. It's a good time.
Yeah. The North American Bigfoot Center. Can you tell us a little bit about it? I was reading about it. The website is really nice. I'm a big fan of the website, but
well, thanks. Yeah, the North American Bigfoot Center. On the surface, I guess it's a museum, right? But that's just the surface. I didn't call it the North American Bigfoot Museum specifically for this reason. We have a threefold purpose, I guess. The first is obviously to educate the public that Sasquatches are real animals, and that's a big part of the job. That's what the museum is for. We get families coming by, obviously. It was kind of a tourism thing at the end of the day, but we're so much more than that. We're not a world's biggest ball of wax sort of place, even though I love those. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, for sure. They're the best.
Yeah, we're a science museum about Sasquatch. It's about just educating the public that they're real animals, and there you go. Nothing actually all that special about them, honestly. The second thing that we're trying to do there is to find and curate historical artifacts and collections and preserve them and curate them, because the first generation of Sasquatch researchers are pretty much all dead, and the second generation, they're getting old too, honestly. And what happens to their stuff? Can you imagine like your uncle or your aunt or somebody dies? It's like, oh, Aunt Joyce was really into Bigfoot, and this is all of her stuff, but Bigfoot's not real. You just throw it out afterwards. But Sasquatches are in fact real animals. And after their discovery, or at least I think their discovery is ongoing. I'm kind of with John Binder, and I'll go about that one. But after their academic acceptance is a good way to say it. All this pre-discovery stuff is going to be of great interest. So we're trying to find these records before they're lost to time, because so many researchers have already had their collection thrown away, essentially. And there's really interesting things of value in there. And I'm sorry, but then the last thing that we're doing is we're also trying to, I get a little long-winded, so I'm sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
The last thing we're doing is we are using contemporary and historical data to drive our own field research. which is, I think, an important aspect of what we're doing. We're out there in the woods. We're generally out at least once a week, sometimes twice a week or more, doing our own field research. And so far, I will say that by narrowing down my focus, instead of, flying all over the U.S. doing the show or something like that, Finding Bigfoot show, by narrowing my focus, we've been very, very successful so far. I think we cast, I think about a dozen footprint and handprint casts in December. So
Wow.
this the data-driven focus that we've really had here is turning out excellent results. So I'm very, very pleased to share with you that. So those are the three things: educate the public, find and curate and protect historical collections, and then use data that comes to the shop to drive our own research.
I got a couple questions. One, not so important. Like, how the historical stuff, do people contact you? Are you like seeking that out? Like, if people have had this stuff in their family and I don't know, their offspring are like, we don't care, we're going to get rid of this, do they contact you? Or
Sometimes they do.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes they do. Like, for example, one of the cooler archival sort of collections we have is the Barbara Wasson collection. Barbara Wasson was a very active field researcher throughout most of the early 1970s and probably a mid to middle-ish late 80s. She wrote a book called Sasquatch Apparitions, and she was one of the only female researchers for like a long time. I mean, there was her, there was Joyce Kearney, and I think that's about it, honestly. And they were in there with the Peter Burns and the Renee DeHindens and the John Greens. They knew all those people and corresponded with them. I have the personal correspondences from Barbara to prove it. So I have her entire research collection, or at least what's left of it. And like, her daughter reached out to me years ago because she had some extra copies of her mom's book when she passed away. And so I purchased those from her, and I thought they were great, little historical things. But this is before the museum idea was even a seed in my head. But then later on, her son reached out to me because he heard about it from his sister that, oh yeah, Cliff is sometimes interested in historical things. So that one came to me. I don't know if you know who Paul Freeman is. He's one of the most successful Bigfoot researchers, field guys out there. He cast quite a few footprints. His daughter actually reached out to me and arranged to have his field research map brought to the museum. And now Michael Freeman, Paul's son, he's a good friend of mine, and he's given us some artifacts. And people know that I think people know that I'm interested in the historical part of this. And I guess that some people who have these things trust me to do what's right with them, because I mean they're not monetarily valuable. That's not where their value comes from. They're historically valuable, and I guess people, and I'm thankful that people trust me to curate them long after their parents many times have passed away. So it's an honor, really. It's an honor and a privilege, and it's not one that I take lightly at all. What we have long-term goals actually at the museum to eventually make an online archive, so these things will be available to the public and housed in a nonprofit. Right now, an LLC owns them right now, but hopefully eventually they're going to end up in a nonprofit. Especially, like, all my collection will be passed on to this as well, because I've got a big collection now of my own stuff, let alone people like Barbara Wasson. We have the end of Dr. Leroy Fish's collection. And of course, he's the biologist that was part owner of the Skookum cast. We have Chuck Edmonds' collection. He was a Bigfoot and UFO researcher in the very early 1960s. He was famous for a small number of pretty nerdy niche things that I could tell you about. So the list goes on and on. We're getting quite a collection, and we have great plans of what we're going to do with them.
Now, I love this idea. And I loved looking through the website, which is why, I mention it, is doing any kind of like research, or just on a, as a hobby, as like a side thing, interests of mine. It's difficult to find a database of, sightings and listings and just kind of laid out with like the stories. And I like the idea of the preservation of the history, because you got to look in 15,000 different places if you're going to look for it online.
Yeah, everybody and their mother has a sighting database now. I mean, I have 12 or 1,500 sightings of my own in my own database. But I mean, Moneymaker at the BFRO, he does a way better job than I would do at that. So I just let him, he can do that. I've got my own interests. On my personal website, which is just my name, cliffbarackman.com, I have a footprint cast data, or footprint. Most of them are casts. Some of them are just impressions in the ground. A footprint database, which is the only one of its kind. But I hope to expand on that and get some three-dimensional modeling going on, because I'm also the owner of, I think it's safe to say now that legitimately I have the largest footprint cast collection in the world. And I want to make those available especially for academics throughout the world. And the only way to really do that is by doing 3D scanning and getting those up on an archive. And so I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work. I will perpetually be behind probably until the day I die or past that. But those are my hopes and goals, is to give something back. Because again, I mean, the animals are real. That's the bottom line. They are actually really there. So what good can I do, especially for them? It's not about me. It's not about my legacy or, Cliff. It's not about me at all. I wish I could take me out of it, honestly. But it's about them. And I want to try to give something back, I guess,
Yeah, absolutely. You have now I know that you are this is a real animal, like a flesh and blood kind of thing. And I was reading through some of your articles, and I read some things that you've said that are highly interesting, and also things that should have occurred to me but didn't, such as where are the bodies? And you compare it in an article to bears and in finding like dead bears. Can you tell us a little bit about that theory?
Well, yeah. People say if they're real, where the bones? And my response, well, if bears are real, where are their bones, right? Because we don't find naturally dead bear bones. And the key word there is naturally dead. You do find poached bears, you do find roadkill bears and things like that, but not naturally dead, because bears, like mountain lions or say Sasquatches, they are apex predators. Nothing hunts and kills them for food, like rabbits or deer or elk or anything like that. Those animals, the prey animals, they don't get to choose where they die. Whereas apex predator animals, they literally choose where they're going to die. They just don't know they're going to die, is the thing. They get sick, and then they probably hide themselves away somewhere, just like we would do, because we're vulnerable during those times. And it's a harsh world out there in the woods, so they hide themselves away in some far-flung corner under a rock somewhere. And then one day they die instead of getting better like they have every other time in their life. And so they literally started by hiding their bones. Whether they intended, they certainly didn't intend to, but functionally they hid their bones. And then within a few hours to a few days, scavengers would move in and start eating away the flesh. The hair is eaten by moths, it turns out. Bone, or like the body parts will be scattered, like a coyote might bring the leg over there, a bear might bring an arm over there, or something like that. And then so the flesh will be eaten away very quickly. And bones, it turns out, are a very good source of calcium, obviously. So pretty much everything out there eats bones. Porcupines are notorious for eating bones. Wood rats, the most plentiful animal in North American forests by biomass, the deer mouse, eat bones. Coyotes eat bones. Bears eat bones. Deer and elk eat bones. That's where they get the calcium for their antlers. Everything out there eats bones. So the body is basically recycled very, very quickly. But on top of that, you have to consider the rarity of the species as well. Sasquatches are probably amongst, well, maybe but certainly amongst the most rare animals in North American forests, especially large animals. We suspect, we being the Bigfoot community or whatever, that there's probably 100, maybe 200 bears for every one Bigfoot. Okay. Now, in my state of Oregon, there's about 30,000, maybe 35,000 bears here in Oregon. That means there's about 300 Bigfoot or 350 Bigfoot, maybe. Not that many, really. And of course, bears live kind of like dogs do in a way. They live as long as dogs do, about 12 to 17 years, maybe in the wild. I don't know. I'm not sure that number, but it's somewhere in there. I'm confident. Sasquatches, being primates, being great apes like humans and gorillas and stuff, they almost certainly live 40, 50 years or so out in the wild. And there's actually a biological rule that the name escapes me, but the larger animals tend to live a little longer. I know it's not true of dog breeds, but it's true of things like cetaceans, where whales live a lot longer than dolphins do. I mean, there's some whales out there that are 250 years old, for example.
Yeah.
Sasquatches might live as late as 50 or 60 years old. We don't know. We have no idea, of course. But it's just 50 years. If there's 300 of these things, and they live 50 years, what's rough math? Is that 6 every year die in Oregon or something like that at the most? I don't know. I don't know the math. Someone smart than me can figure it out. But basically, not very many of these animals are dying every year. So you have to consider that as well. So yeah, you're almost certainly not going to find a naturally dead body. I mean, it's possible, but it's extraordinarily unlikely, especially since you don't find bears, you don't find mountain lions, There you go.
It didn't resonate with me until I started thinking about, because we're, Tristan and I are both like in the middle of Illinois. We don't have like bears running around and whatnot. But I started thinking about deer, right? I spent a huge amount of my childhood, no worries, huge amount of my childhood in the forest, like, in the Midwest, and there's deer everywhere.
Yep.
Everywhere, all over the place. And they're prey quite often.
Yeah.
But I've run across maybe 2-3 deer skeletons in my years of being in the woods. And I applied that to this thought, and it just smacked me in the head like, oh, well, that's duh.
Well, even just like the hiding when they're not feeling great. Like if you have a pet that's maybe not doing great, that's what they do. They hide. And it never occurred to me till you said it till just now. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing about Sasquatches, since they are perfectly normal animals, all of these good questions, like where are the bones, they have perfectly normal answers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. It's like I always think about like the smallest chance, explanation for it, and that's not the case.
No.
Another article that you have, and I love this concept because it was one of the reasons given for the Dyatlov Pass incident, which a bunch of hikers, met.
Yeah, that was a hoax, by the way. I hope you know that.
Yeah, I know. Popping my bubble. But one of the explanations they were talking about was infrasound. And knowing that this is a thing that occurs, and then we were talking to Greg Lawson last week about the village in Alaska, Portlock.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the research, one of the explanations given for that was also infrasound. So I was delighted to find an article that you had written of the actual biological mechanism and reasoning for infrasound. Was wondering if you could expound on that a little bit, because
I think
so fascinated.
It's very reasonable, I think, to expect Sasquatches to use infrasound for a variety of purposes. Infrasonic frequencies are well known from many other large mammals, elephants, and outside the mammals too. Alligators have it, for example. But tigers, they have infrasonic frequencies in their roar. And, the Navy back in, I think it was the 60s, might have been the 50s, kind of a weird MK Ultra thing. They were doing experiments on humans to see what high amplitude infrasound would do to them. That's where like the myth of the brown note happened, that South Park did a whole episode on it, right? Where supposedly this high intensity infrasonic frequency will make you poop your pants. Turns out that's not really true, but it's still funny. It's a great South Park episode. And so they were doing experiments to see how these affect people. And some of the effects were like nausea, dizziness, being disoriented, brief paralysis, stuff like that. We see that sort of thing sometimes in Sasquatch reports. Dr. John Bindernagel, who's passed now, unfortunately, but he was a biologist, a field biologist. And in his book, Sasquatch, North American Great Ape, he wrote a brief thing about infrasonic frequencies and noted that at least one sighting report, this is from John Green's database, has a hunter, like maybe in a tree stand or something, and he saw a Sasquatch scream at a deer and then walk up and basically snap his neck and throw it over his shoulder and walk away. The deer didn't resist. So that's some suggestion that maybe they are using something to that effect, because tigers have infrasonic frequencies in their roars that serve to briefly confuse and paralyze their prey. So Yeah, it's entirely possible that Sasquatches have something like that as well. And also, when you look at the environment in which Sasquatches live, infrasonic frequencies would be very, very useful for them, because infrasonic frequencies are not absorbed by trees, whereas higher frequencies are. Trees act like a sponge to all that sort of sound. But also, you can feel it through the ground. In fact, it passes through the ground. So theoretically, a Sasquatch on one side of a mountain can make noise and be heard on the other side of the mountain just by the sound waves going through the mountain. So we don't know any of this is true, but it's an interesting thought exercise. And of course, there are some, data points that suggest that, yeah, they might be using those sort of things. Especially that idea where I'm sure if you've dipped your toes into the Bigfoot sighting report stuff at all, you've read several reports where the witness was perhaps aware that something was off before they saw the Sasquatch. The hair raised on the back of their neck, or they got scared, or something like that. And of course, I've spoken to a lot of witnesses now, but several of the witnesses I've spoken to have been yelled at by these things nearby. They said they could feel it in their body cavity rumbling, and that's another suggestion, I think, that these things are in fact using infrasound.
Well, yeah, you get reports of the infrasound and the effect that it has on us, and it's all of these things. It's disorienting. It's confusing. Like, you feel it through your whole body, like it's almost like another sense of something.
Yeah, you feel it, right?
Yeah. Also, I'm not getting away from this from how serious I'm taking the subject, but the idea of just a little Bigfoot walking up and just screaming in somebody's face is a little bit amusing to me.
Oh yeah. It'd be an interesting question to see if the little ones, if Sasquatches do end up having infrasonic usage, could the little ones do it, or do you need a big body cavity? I know there's a lot of questions that go with this. I don't really know much. So.
Exactly, or is it like a learned thing, and then you like something that you have to learn how to use?
Yeah, I don't know. It's
I really love the idea of stunning somebody with, I'm very sensitive to sound. Just the slightest thing will take me out. I can't deal with it. And the fact that anyone else could experience that from something else, and it's a very natural, and it happens in nature everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I love that so much.
Yeah, it does. That's part of the difficulty with figuring out if Sasquatches are using it, because there are infrasonic frequencies all around us.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The ocean emits them all the time. Volcanism, so like rocks moving underground and that sort of stuff. Avalanches are a good source of infrasonic frequencies. And of course, you can't just, not every microphone or recorder can even record them, because it turns out, it makes sense that the sound technicians don't tend to make microphones for sounds that humans can't hear. Right, it makes sense. Yeah, so there's a whole just a whole array of challenges involved in finding out if Sasquatches use infrasound. Mm-hmm. But to my knowledge, no thorough survey, or any survey at all, has been done of North American animals that use infrasound. So it's rife for any sort of PhD student who's looking for something cool.
Oh, absolutely, because you don't hear about it a lot. I mean, it was just very recently that I learned of the connection between them and elephants, right? And how elephant herds are able to communicate over long distances.
5 to 7 miles, and they feel the vibration in their big padded feet, which is another Sasquatch thing. Sasquatches have large padded feet, and maybe that's how they do that too. We don't know. There's just so many interesting correlations and possibilities out there.
Oh yeah, it just captures the imagination, and you just go wild with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think break.
Oh, good point. Let's take a break. Oh, we're back.
Oh, that was fast. Nice. Yeah. It's like almost no time passed at all.
Yeah, it's weird.
Oh, it's so
supernatural podcast. We time travel a little bit sometimes. It's fine.
So I have some questions too, because one of the things that I like so much about the field of any kind of cryptozoology is thinking about the environment and how things may have evolved to fit within that environment. And there's reports of the smaller species, I guess one would say, of Sasquatch. And you took a trip to Sumatra, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To study the Otang.
No, the orang pendek. The
Orang
otang is a
pendek,
local
thank you.
name of an unknown hominoid of some sort that lives in South Africa. But in Sumatra, they have persistent reports of bipedal apes between 3 and 5 feet tall that they call orang pendek, which is orang means man in Indonesian. That's where the word orangutan comes from. Orangutan. Orang means man, and utan means forest. So orangutans are actually forest men. That's what they call them. But orang pendek is a short man because they're little, essentially. And on one side of the island, away from Kerinci National Park, which is kind of the epicenter for a lot of the orang pendek stuff, there's another unknown species that is represented by a very small number of footprints and a very small number of sighting reports. Almost no one has ever written anything about these. It's called the orang gadang, which means big man, essentially. And these aren't even reported to be Sasquatch size. They're reported to be somewhere about 5, maybe 6 feet tall. But it's possible that these are an entirely different species. We don't really know.
So looking at it from like an evolution sort of standpoint, are we thinking that they are more like primates that have descended down and sort of adapted to the environment that they're in? Is that why the reports of like the Yeti, where they're just massive and like a bigger
That's
animal?
not true. The Yeti, though. That's not true, though. There are 3 forms that are described with the word Yeti in the Himalayas. Okay. One is a large Sasquatch-like animal, 7, 8 feet tall. I've personally spoken to witnesses in Nepal that have seen these things. There's another form that is a smaller form, generally 5 feet tall, give or take, and it's really best represented by the McNeely Cronin footprints, I believe was the name. In early '71, mountaineers found these footprints, and it had an abducted hallux. The hallux is the big toe. Abducted means off to the side, like your thumb. Where Sasquatches have a adducted hallux, like a human, the big toe in line with the rest of them. And we assume that the larger Yeti species probably has that as well, although there are no known. Well, no, there is a footprint. There is a footprint actually of it. And yeah, so it has an adducted hallux like a human does. But there's another whole species of animal that they call Yeti there that is some sort of much more ape-like, I guess. And it has an abducted hallux, like a toe going off to the side. And that one is quite small, 4, 5, 6 feet tall, somewhere in there. So just to set the record straight, so.
No, yeah, my mind is blown because all
by the way, there's a third form of Yeti. I might as well say that too. I did say
yeah, please.
All along, I've been wandering around thinking that there was just this one.
No. The third form of Yeti has some unfortunate fallout because of it. It's essentially a brown bear, and then we all know it's a brown bear, and they call those things Yeti too, because the Yeti is kind of like there's a loose translation from the local tongues, means like that man-like thing over there, so that's what Yeti kind of translates into. And when bears stand up, that's a Yeti. But I don't know if you remember, but Dr. Brian Sykes, who's a world-renowned geneticist, he wrote a book, and then he did a series of specials on Nat Geo, where he was doing DNA analyses on a variety of things. And one of the things he did is that he tested some supposed Yeti hair, and it came back as bear, and that was the headline. Yetis are bears. Too bad, everybody. But he got the hair off of a bear pelt. Of course it's going to be a bear. We all knew it was going to be a bear, but that's not what Nat Geo put out as the headline. They put the headline out being very misleading, to say the very least. And I thought the whole Brian Sykes thing was a huge missed opportunity, and almost just I'll say misleading to be kind. But it did some damage to the subject, unfortunately. But again, if Dr. Brian Sykes, who's now passed, so I'm not going to slam the dead guy, if he had done his research appropriately, like I would expect any other PhD to do, he would have known that there were 3 forms of the Yeti, and one of them is indeed a brown bear, which is the kind of hair that he tested. And lo and behold, he got brown bear as the result. So.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for saying that the PhD candidate should have known about the 3 different forms of Yeti. And, that excuses me because I'm not the PhD candidate.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's just the way I feel. If you're going to go out on a limb and you're going to work in that geo, you should probably do your homework, If you're going to Nepal, read the Yeti literature,
I feel like that's completely accurate. But the way that these develop geographically, does that make sense to you? Like
Well, yeah, sure, but that's true of everything. Yeah. We are all, even the fruit flies are the winners of our evolutionary race so far. So everything has adapted to their appropriate environment, essentially. And so if we look at relict hominoids, which is the term you're looking for, you said Sasquatches, but Sasquatches are specifically North America. So if we look at relict hominoids, which is the term that we're kind of moving on into at this point, and relict is a biological term that means still surviving in small numbers, even though their populations were probably more widespread at one time. And a hominoid is a term that basically means a human-shaped thing, right? So relict hominoid. You see, when you look at human ancestors and the other apes as well, even if we're not directly related to them in that sort of way, all of the known species of apes right now are relic species. I think there's 5 different species. There's bonobos, chimps, orangutans, gorillas, humans, and that's pretty much it. Gibbons are a lesser ape, but they're apes nonetheless. There used to be hundreds of species of apes. Hundreds of them. Yeah. Okay. And they're all gone now. Then it turns out that the only species that are left happen to all be tropical, but that wasn't always the case. There were, temperate apes everywhere in the world at one time. And so who's to say that all of those species, whether they're an ape species or a human ancestor, what we call a hominin, who's to say all of those have died out? Okay. I argue that they haven't. I argue that there's at least a couple forms still in existence. And all of them have persisted in their ecological niche and been pretty successful at it, I think. When you look at Sumatra, you were talking about the orang pendek. It is smaller, and it is known that there's something called island dwarfism, where if you live on an island long enough, your species tends to get smaller. Like the mammoths, for example, that lived on the Channel Islands in Southern California, they were quite small, even in spite of their name Mammoth, which means large. People thought for a long. Well, let's here you go. This is a great example. Let's look at Homo floresiensis, which was that hobbit species that was discovered in 2004, for example.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was discovered on the island of Flores.
I got real excited about that.
Good. I'm also a fan of paleoanthropology. That was discovered on the island of Flores. Okay. The island of Flores, to this day, has persistent stories from the native local people there of small hair-covered human-like things in the woods. On one side of the island, they're called Ibugogo. And on the other side of the island, what is it? I can't remember the name they call them, but a guy named Dr. Gregory Forth has written an excellent book called, is it Almost Human? No. I forget what the name of the book is. Gosh darn it. If I didn't have a power outage and we were in my office, I could off the shelf, but I can't. I don't know if you can tell, but it's dark here. I've got no power for 4 days now, so you're lucky to have me at all.
And you're here, so thank you so much.
I know.
Yeah. But anyway, Dr. Gregory Forth is arguing that these things are still there because he knows witnesses who have seen them quite recently. And that's just the island of Flores, which is a hop, skip, and a jump from Sumatra. Anyway, Homo floresiensis, for a while was thought to be a Homo erectus with island dwarfism. But no, there's actually too many differences, and there's reasonable idea to speculate that these things are actually Australopithecines, or something at least more archaic, I think is a good term for that. Something in terms of Homo habilis or even earlier, which would be Australopithecines, which is super, super interesting because that would be the first known example of an Australopithecine radiating out of Africa, which would be fantastic. But anyway, it turns out, no, they're not Homo erectus with island dwarfism, although that was a reasonable guess at first because the type specimen, the holotype, the very, very first known sample of Homo erectus was from Java. They called it Java Man, which is right there. Oh, right. But I don't think that orang pendeks are Homo floresiensis. I think Ubugogos probably are. But orang pendeks, you see, I sponsored a project back when I had a little extra money. When I was on Finding Bigfoot and I was having TV money, I had a little extra cash. So I sponsored a project in Sumatra with local investigators to try to get footprint casts of orang pendeks. And I got quite a few casts, although it turns out that some of them are absolutely fake because it's a long story. some of my contacts that were paying witnesses, and that always leads to hoaxing and all that sort of stuff. And I did not direct them to do that. They were doing that without me knowing for a while, but I caught on and figured it out. But nonetheless, despite that, out of the maybe 40 casts that I have from Sumatra, I think a small number of them are actually real, which is really interesting. And if they are in fact real, they are not Homo floresiensis, because the foot structure has that abducted hallux. It has the toe going out to the side, which is super interesting, because the orangutan, the big one on the other side of Sumatra, also has that same feature, as does the Yeti, one of those Yeti forms that I mentioned. Could it be that it is perhaps a ground-dwelling orangutan, which we know existed, by the way, in that place, and not that long ago in the geologic record? Could it be that is actually persisting in small pockets, not far from its historical record, to this present day? And maybe all of those things. Maybe an orang pendek is a smaller version of the orangutan, and the Yeti and the orangutan are the same form. I don't know. There's so many questions, and as you can tell, you got me all riled up, and I'm talking about all these ideas now. So, there's so much to learn.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, because now I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, well, how many of these sightings are relics or species that we thought had gone extinct, and then how many are things that we never knew were there? Yeah.
That's the thing too. Like, because when you look at Ivan Sanderson's book, the Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life, which is kind of one of the first books ever written on the subject. He is now kind of getting his due, because he wrote about all these different forms from all over the planet, and at the end of the day, he's kind of being proven right through this idea of relict hominoids, because the Almasty of Eastern Europe is not the Sasquatch of North America, which is not the Ibogogo of Flores, which is not the Sumatra, the orang pendek of Sumatra. So I don't know. It's pretty interesting. I hear my generator. I really hope I don't lose power right now. I might be running out of gas.
Oh,
you're kind of getting darker and brighter.
If it does run out of gas, I'm gonna have to check out for a second, go fill it up, and try to log back on, because my internet's gonna go out.
Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much information that is happening in my brain right now.
I'm not the Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch lady. That's Jenny. I don't know a lot about any of this, and it should have, because it's so obvious. But there he goes. I'll just keep talking though.
Yeah.
It never really occurred to me that there were on different continents, different countries, whatever. These are all different species.
Yeah.
It's so obvious. Of course
because
they are.
The reports, and they're consistent too, is the thing. Is when you look at some of the indigenous people's descriptions or drawings or whatever, you see the consistency in the geographical area, which is crazy. But yeah, they're all different flavors, I guess, of.
And short ones, that's not a thing in my head. That's a whole new ball of wax.
Well, think about it. I mean, over the past however many years, if I did math, I would be able to do math. All right, hang on, because he's calling right now. Okay, there you are. Well, I couldn't see you on the screen because my phone rang and all that stuff. So obviously we can cut this portion out. But he's going to go take care of the generator, and then
folks, I'm not cutting any of this out. Enjoy the mess that is a winter 2024. Hello. Thank you.
Yeah. But because I'm single track sort of mind, I mean, think about it in this way. We went from when you were in school, if you can remember, back to first learning about early man, right? Neanderthals. There were only 3 or 4 different species of,
and the missing link,
humanoid that you can think of, but there's 8 now,
right?
And they discover these things like the Hobbit, because there's no way I'm going to be able to pronounce the actual name of it. I've tried it 1,000 times. It starts with an F.
Latin?
Homo F. Yeah.
It's dead.
Homo F. That guy, the Hobbit. So, I mean, it wasn't discovered until incredibly recently. I mean, it was in the 2000s. And it's not the only one. There's been a couple that have been only discovered in the 2000s. Look at the coelacanth, the fish that went extinct.
Right.
And then
And
that
then they
tribe
found
was
it.
just eating it. Yeah.
I
Just
mean,
like, oh yeah, we got these things all the time. They're great. Try it with lemon.
but that, I mean, the ocean, that's a whole nother story where no
Yeah.
one has explored it at all. And everything is probably still there and just hiding. That's my theory.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, forests, like gigantic miles and acres and whatever. That's the same as the ocean, as far as I'm concerned. It's just never ending and just scary, and you'll get lost if you try and go in there.
Yeah. You'll see when we go to Washington.
What are you going to do?
You will not get lost. You will not get lost. But
Do you
if
promise?
I promise you. I promise I will not. I will tie a bell to
That's
you.
yeah, but that doesn't mean I'll find my way out.
Well, I'll find you and lead you out, is what I'm saying with the
What
bell.
if you get lost?
Well, I won't get lost. Listen, all I'm saying is that when you go into some of these national parks and you go, I mean, legally, you do not go off the path because you're not supposed to. But if you happen to accidentally wander a little bit off the path, like it's like a whole different world. Like you don't know where you're going. You're back in it. Yeah, you're almost lost if you wander away. Yeah, it's a whole new world.
Oh my God, I got her to sing.
Yeah, don't cut out the part where I'm singing.
Nope, absolutely not.
Keep that in. It's imperative. But yeah, it's fascinating to think about all of these different and you know, I don't know if you remember the rant that I went on with sirens, and this is not, or mermaids, and this is not scientific whatsoever, but there is a theory that at one point in time, our ancestors, one of those little branches, you know, went right on back to the ocean, and they're like, I don't like this land thing. We're going back to the seas.
Sucks. Screw capitalism.
Yeah.
I'm out. Valid. I get it.
Yeah. They
100%.
escaped the Neanderthal economics and they went back to the ocean and developed gills and all of those things again, which you get some of these horrific, you know, reports of sightings because they would have adapted to their environment.
Listen, until Cliff gets back, let's talk about mermaids. Have you seen the mermaid videos? They are wild.
Yes.
They're gross.
They're no, yes,
they're not hot like manatees.
They're not going to be hot like manatees. Captain Cook would want none of them. None of that business. And they adapt to the environment. They would need to be a predator, so they would need to have teeth.
Okay, let me posit a question to you.
Yeah.
Columbus, was he doing it with manatees or actual mermaids?
I think Columbus was up for whatever.
Yeah, he totally was. He was like, man, these mermaids have cake. Let's go.
Yeah, I don't think.
And then all the sailors were like, oh, that's not a mermaid, bro. Don't do that. That's gross. And he's like, nah, mermaids.
Yeah, I think that there's something not right in your brain if you're coming over and you're like, oh, this habitable, you know, place that is already populated, we're just gonna call it ours now. There's something wrong with you to begin with. So
these sea cows are mermaids. They're not as hot as I thought they would be, but they're suitable.
Yeah. If your goal is going to be, I'm gonna wipe out the original people here, there's something wrong. So I could make the connection to them
being stupid.
Doing the sea cow. Doesn't help when I call them sea cows.
I will, however, back him up on the ocean UFOs that he watched go in and out of the ocean on the way back and whatever. That's the only thing I'll back him up on. That's it. 100. Otherwise, he's a dumb idiot.
That's fair. Anyway, back to Sasquatch. I mean, and these things wandering around in some of these national parks. Teddy Roosevelt, he was a believer. He had reports.
Yes,
Sasquatch.
he had multiple, didn't he?
Yes. Yes. And he started our whole park system.
Solely to do
Papa
this.
Ruse is what I call him.
Do you really?
I do.
As of right
Ruse.
now or previously?
No,
as well?
right now. Right now, that was the decision I just made.
I support that and I enjoy it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good
Mhm.
one.
Mhm,
Good
mhm.
old Papa Ruse.
Hey, so while he's gone, let's talk about that sound stuff.
Yeah, infrasound.
Yes.
Yeah. that dear sweet man trying to burst my bubble about Dyatlov.
What a jerk. No, I'm just kidding.
No, not really. It was
no.
just an avalanche, but whatever.
Right. Like
Totally fine.
we don't need to get into Dilettante
Anyway,
because it's all a bunch
so
of
yeah, infrasound. Yep. So the fascinating thing with that, especially with the elephants, is they're so smart. There are so many reports of elephants, first of all, just doing jerk things, which is great because it's always like out of vengeance and more power
Right.
to them.
When they all showed up to that woman's funeral who had hurt an elephant and they were like, "We're not done with you."
I know. Yeah. No, like we're not done.
Yes.
We are doing that.
We have more to go. What you got before?
Mhm.
That was nothing. That
Nothing.
was us lightly patting you on the head. Now
Now
that
we're
you
gonna
are
mess you up.
past.
Mhm.
Oh, here.
Yeah. Well, there's sweet, heartwarming stories about the elephants too. Like one of there was a guy who worked for a rescue.
Cliff.
Hello.
Hi.
We started talking about it. You missed the part where we talked about mermaids, but you came back just in time for elephants.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, sorry about that. I apologize. I mean, I guess I could have perhaps foreseen that, but I thought I had another hour or two left in the generator. And
you're
it's been a heck of a week. You're lucky. Honestly, you're lucky to have me at all at this point.
Yes, we are. And we fully acknowledge that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you're lucky to have me. I'm just saying that, like, I'm lucky to be anywhere.
In all context.
Yes.
Lucky
what she said
on the show. So. I'm unbelievably thrilled.
But where were we? Bigfoot, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I think it was right about there.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was saying something that doesn't matter. So, Jenny, do you have a question? I don't.
Me too.
I have so many questions. What we were talking about while you were gone was the different species of this creature. I can't even say like Bigfoot, but I'm going to use the overarching term of Bigfoot for all of these different species who are all in these different areas. And, it makes absolute sense, especially when you look at ancient humanoids and they're discovering new ones like the Hobbit that they just discovered. And we went from, I don't know, I remember 3 or 4 when I was in high school, and now there's 8.
There's a lot, and just the last couple of years, I mean, this is really the golden age of paleoanthropology. It really is. If I had, if I wasn't an old man already and I'd go back to school or something like that, I would probably almost certainly major in paleoanthropology because human ancestors are just so fascinating and so interesting. And of course, I'm really into the Bigfoot thing. It makes perfect sense for me to do that. But just in the last few years, I mean, so you had 2 species described in journals a year ago, July. There was one just recently, last couple of months too. But last July, there were 2 species discovered, if you want to say that. Described is a better term. I forget the name of one, but one was from Israel, and the other one was from nearby. That one one of them got all the attention because that has a sexy name. They called it Dragon Man, right? It was Homo longi. It was Dragon Man, and so like that one got all the press, because it's so cool. The other one kind of got lost in the shuffle there, but I think that's equally cool. And of course, before that, it was a year and a half before that. I think it was in May of 2020, May. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. I got a really weird elastic sense of time, and I only have so much time. But Homo luzonensis was discovered. That was a small species that human discovered in the Philippines. And again, it was like the orang pendek in a way. In fact, it was about 3 feet tall, 3 or 4 feet tall, and they actually thought it might be not an orang pendek, a Homo floresiensis, a hobbit species. They thought it might be one of those for a moment, but it turns out it's different enough that it's its own species, which is really cool. And of course, there's Homo naledi from South Africa. It was discovered not that long ago, and all this was kicked off by Homo floresiensis on Flores. It's a really fascinating time to be interested in paleoanthropology. And even now, with all these new discoveries, we probably know about 1.5% of all the species that have ever lived.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
It's very cool. Why do you think that we're finding so many so rapidly in the past decade or so?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it has something to do with the way we're looking. I think the stuff. You look at the Leakeys. The Leakeys were basically working a couple different spots in Eastern Africa, and so you got a lot of the African species like Paranthropus that's a genus, but and like the Australopithecines, Australopithecus afarensis and africanus and all those, and so those were the areas that they were working, and they got a lot of those things. So I think maybe they're trying these things in different areas. I don't really know why we're doing so much better now, but it certainly has something to do with just the maturity of the science itself and the techniques that they're using. Because remember, we didn't know about any human ancestors until like the middle of the 1800s. Mm-hmm. We didn't know about any of them. I think Neanderthals were the first ones that discovered, and they thought those were humans for a long time with like some sort of rickets. If I remember right, there's a wonderful book by Ian Tattersall, who's head of the paleoanthropology department, I think at the New York Natural History Museum. Fascinating book. He's a great author, and there's a book called "The Case of the Rickety Cossack." And Cossack is a ethnicity of person in Europe or Asia somewhere, and rickety means they had rickets. Because when the first Neanderthal skeleton, they thought they had rickets because it was so different than humans, and then he goes through a brief history of paleoanthropological discoveries, and you realize, holy smokes, not only is this really twisted tale that's worthy of documentation, but there's also relatively little. I was a friend of mine, a guy named Dr. Isaac Tian. He, I sometimes work on a show called Proof is Out There. And a couple of years ago, that show did a Bigfoot special, and they used some AI techniques to clean up the Patterson-Gimlin film. Isaac was the guy who did that, so he's a legit scientist. He's a PhD now. He and I were talking. We were on expedition a few months ago in the Blue Mountains, and he was telling me that he took a couple. He's a computer nerd for a living, but he took a couple paleoanthropology classes because he, like me, is also very interested in that. And he said that there are so few good examples of human ancestors that he had to memorize all of them for his class. That's how few there are. That like you can actually memorize every single specimen for your class, and it's not a ridiculous thing to ask. That's how few there are, and we're talking like nice cranium and things like that. There's lots of bones and the finger bones and stuff like that. But as far as nice cranium go, or crania go, there's relatively few. And so when you read books about the history of paleoanthropology, that's really driven home well. Is that we know so little, and we know so much based on so little, which I think is really cool, really neat.
Well, something that goes towards Tressa's question, and also something that's why it's so fascinating to talk to someone like you is it's a fascinating time for cryptozoology too, or any sort of discovery, because everybody's communicating more. And then in a lot of these situations, we're getting actual scientists, and those reports are being more easily communicated to other people and just the general public, and it's interesting and so fascinating. I don't know where I was going with that. I'm so excited. I'm just jazzed to be here.
Yeah, it's far too few, because I'm not a scientist. I'm a citizen scientist at best.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to have the ear of a couple real scientists, and I think that's great. And I cherish those relationships, and I learn a tremendous amount from them. At the end of the day, I'm a learner still. I was an elementary school teacher before television grabbed me, and teachers are generally good learners. That's what we enjoy doing. And so that's really my strength. It's one of my strengths, I guess. Being a 5th grade teacher, I'm also a good communicator, especially for the American public, who generally has about a 7th grade reading level. So not slamming America here, but it's the truth. It's not a great thing to, we're 7th grade. I mean, I don't know, but I can communicate rather complex ideas and into relatively simple words, so everybody can grasp the ideas. Everybody has the concept. I think that, I guess, is another one of my things, superpowers, I guess. But too few scientists are involved in this, but it doesn't take, you don't necessarily have to have real scientists, like PhDs and stuff at universities. It helps. And there are certainly a lot of university scientists who are interested in the subject, but aren't ready to say much about it yet. Either they're not completely convinced, or they're open to it, but like waiting to be convinced by something better, which I think is where most people should be, honestly.
Yes.
To accept something wholeheartedly without evidence, that's a belief system, and belief does damage to science a lot of times. You should always doubt yourself, always doubt what you think, always try to prove yourself wrong, and to see if the evidence can prove you wrong. And that's a success if you do. It's great. Maybe that's why I like science so much, is because it's one of the only subjects that I could be wrong in, and that's a victory, because I'm wrong all the time. It sure helps. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that number of PhDs that I personally know that are very interested in the subject, that were very willing to listen to what I have to say, or take my call, or correspond via email, but aren't ready to be public about it yet. It's an exciting thing to witness, because that means the evidence is approaching an appropriate level, that the evidence is compelling to those who know far more than I do. I'm just a grunt. I'm out there in the woods trying to cast stuff. I'm trying to bring evidence to people. I'm trying to do the best job I can to represent the subject for those academics. I'm a science communicator to the public, where people like Dr. Meldrum is to the academics.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of where I was going with my pointless point earlier, was that the scientific method is now being used more and more frequently, and people like you do use more of a scientific method when you're out looking for evidence and when you're analyzing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I might not totally agree with that. I certainly advocate for the scientific method being used. I certainly advocate for that, but I'm not sure it's being used more, because I see quite the opposite happening, honestly.
Really? Okay.
And maybe that's just because it really irks me. But I've pretty much abandoned social media at this point. I have to have a Facebook, and
Right.
Instagram and all that other Twitter nonsense and stuff. But I also have a Cliff one, a museum one, and probably a podcast one, but I never look at, and so I kind of have to, because of that. That's the way I scratch my living. But man, I'll tell you, I've pretty much abandoned it all, because on there, you either have there's two big camps that really get to me. One is the scoff dick, where just whatever is brought out, the person, the evidence, the whatever is immediately dragged through the mud and tarred and feathered and run off, essentially, without giving it a proper due, in my opinion. But there's also the whole paranormal side of things that I think is doing real damage to the subject itself.